Canadians owe a lot more on an individual basis than they did in the past. So the Fraser Institute did a study to look at this and detail this. Charles Labama is the resident scholar in economic policy, and he joins us from Vancouver with this study. Charles, when I saw the number, $4.1 trillion out there, I went, whoa, that's a lot of money. Then when I looked at the details, there's a difference between liabilities and debt. Maybe we should have that discussion before we break down the two constituents.
Sure. The direct debt is basically money that governments have already borrowed. When you sum up the federal, provincial, and local governments, comes up to about $1.2 trillion. The unfunded program obligations are the shortfalls at current levels of taxation that governments have to make up in order to fully fund programs like public pensions and healthcare. The difference, the way I've come now to describe this, is that direct debt really is like a mortgage on your house. The program obligations are the promises you make to your kids to fund their education. So you can change those promises into the future. That's really the key thing, the key difference, between program obligations and direct debt. Direct debt's already been incurred. Governments have borrowed the money. They have to repay the principal and interest to their debtors.
Okay, so which is bigger as it stands right now? Direct debt, the ones that we can quantify, if you will, or the ones that we can change in the Canada Pension Plan or Old Age Security or Medicare or any of those?
So direct debt is it's less than 1/3 of the total $4.1 trillion. It's about 1.2. If you look at the unfunded program obligations, they total about $2.2 trillion, and there's other types of liabilities that come together to make up the $4.1 trillion. If you were to slice up the $4.1 trillion for every man, woman, and child in Canada, it works out to about $117,000. If you're looking at only the people who filed taxable income returns, it's about $243,000, so considerably more. We know what's happened in recent times. Governments have been borrowing a lot of money. They've been doing so for 6 years now. There's some pretty significant problems in large provinces like Ontario and Quebec with regards to direct debt. So I think the first takeaway is we need to get direct debt under control, particularly in our big provinces. That means balanced budgets a lot sooner than what they're currently planning for, and not kicking the can down the road. I think the other takeaway is that we need to start thinking about how are we going to fund programs given major change in demographics. We think back to when the Canada Pension Plan, the Old Age Security, and healthcare, universal healthcare began in the 1950s. We had about 7% of the population over the age of 65 in Canada. Today it's about 15, so it's doubled as a proportion. And if you look into the future, 50 years down the road, 25% of Canada's population will be over the age of 65. This is important because all these programs, the pension programs, healthcare, are very much tied to the demographics of the population. So governments need to make tough choices to ensure that younger generation of Canadians are not going to be shafted in the sense that they're going to be the ones paying for these very generous benefits for the current cohort of retirees.
Yeah, and you're suggesting that there'll be fewer workers supporting those expanding retirees. And is the first step then, also as you're suggesting, balanced budgets? And if that's the case, I mean, can you break it down for us a little bit who the worst offenders are on a province-by-province basis?
Ontario absolutely is, Ontario and Quebec. Those are the two worst cases. If you look at Ontario, I mean, it's been all over the news. We've done several reports trying to highlight the problem. Unfortunately now with these budget leaks, it doesn't look good. I mean, basically the current government is saying that we're going to ignore the problem, we're going to continue to spend more, we're going to continue to reduce the competitiveness of Ontario. So that's a really major concern, because at least the previous administration paid lip service to the importance of balancing the budget. This current one seems to just have thrown that completely to the wayside. So that's a major concern. We see the election now happening in Quebec. The previous incumbent government also said, you know what, we're not going to worry about balancing the budget. We're going to kick the can down the road. And there's some other provinces, in addition to the biggest two in Canada, ones like New Brunswick, where they're also planning to have deficits out until 2017, 2018. Look, the recession's been over. It's been over for now 4 years. Governments need to get their books in order. They need to rein in spending, and they need to start focusing on making their jurisdictions more competitive. That means having more competitive tax rates, and that's really, I think, the short-term objective. Get the books balanced, free up the room so you can start improving the competitiveness of the jurisdictions.
Okay, but Charles, as anybody who owns a home knows, you can borrow a lot as long as you can make the payments. And so I guess the way to measure that for governments is as a function of gross domestic product. Are we in line on that parameter?
I'm glad you asked that. When you look at interest payments for all three levels of government, this is the federal, provincial, and local governments, they total about $62 billion. That's for 2011, 2012. That works out to about 10% of all their revenues. So to put it differently, for every revenue dollar that Canadian governments bring in, 10 cents of that goes just to paying interest on the debt that they've already incurred. What that means is it's less money available for the programs that people care about, like healthcare, like education and social services. To me, this is, and even tax relief. This is critical because now we are in a low interest rate environment. Governments are benefiting from relatively low costs of borrowing. What happens 2, 3, 5 years down the road when interest rates go back to their historic levels? That means they're going to have to pay more in interest payments on a greater stock of debt if nothing changes.
Yeah. Yeah, never mind that those liabilities, if they keep giving things away, are going to grow. Charles, interesting report. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pat.